Shalom and welcome to this week's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you for joining us. As we prepare ourselves, our souls, our communities, our families, perhaps, and our friends for Passover. And instead of a guest this week, I wanted to take some time to just share with you some thoughts specific to our generation, to those of us in, as the literature calls it, the longevity revolution, as we are about to enter the Passover season. A very, very difficult Passover. It's very interesting. In the last couple of years, we've been overwhelmed with COVID and isolation and Zoom seders, et cetera, et cetera. And this year, without a doubt, every seder will be tinged and affected by the events in the Middle East and the war, the aftermath of the war, and what to make of the moral, ethical, religious, and political and human issues that have emerged within the world and especially within the American Jewish community. So it will be a very challenging Passover, but that's not the subject of this message, because I'm sure you will be inundated and every colleague will be receiving emails and special readings, and many colleagues will be writing their own, and perhaps at your Seder people will be offering their own. But Passover is a very, very powerful, as you know, holiday. It is, as you probably know, more Jews observe Passover than even the high holidays. And the imagery of the wilderness and the wandering is a metaphor for our own existence as we try to find out who we are, and especially more relevant as we get older. When we begin to think about ourselves, when we begin to look back, perhaps to do our own life review, perhaps to use this period of time around National Healthcare Decision Day, which is the day after April 15th, April 16th. But this season of year when many people encourage people to talk about their wishes, end of life wishes, care plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of symbolism in the wandering and the wilderness. There's lots of symbolism in what that means. And that one of the highlights of every Seder, as you know, ask any kid, is the 4 questions. So I wanted to share with you some ideas about, well, what are 4 questions that we may want to ask ourselves during this Passover season? Questions that really relate to where we are in our own life. Questions that we may be asking in the recesses of our souls late at night when all the deflector shields come down and we can begin to process where we are in our own life. And that really is the first question. It's the first question coming from Genesis chapter 3 in the Hebrew, Ayeka, where are you? It's the story of the Garden of Eden. And this is God's first question to humanity. Ayeka, where are you? And of course, it has to do not physically where we are, but spiritually and emotionally. And I think that's part of the Passover season, when we gather with friends and family and most likely are aware of some of the people who are no longer here, who we shared a Seder with, and are no longer here physically, but maybe here spiritually. So this Ayeka is a very, very powerful question right at the beginning, because Genesis 3 itself, which is one of the most powerful chapters in the Torah, really introduces us to the biblical author's understanding of our own mortality, of our own finity, of the fact that we are all mortal, and we're all at some point going to die. And as we get older and those circle of relationships begin to get smaller and we become more aware of our own finity, perhaps some natural losses in our own body, the loss of friends, loss of family, the changes that are taking place, Ayeka is a very, very powerful question. So let me suggest that that's one of the first of one of these 4 questions that, say, Jewish Sacred Aging is asking you to think about during this Passover season, because they also raise, in answering Ayeka, the very, very serious, what we call the why questions of existence. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why am I here? What is the meaning? What is the purpose of my being alive at this particular period of time on this planet now? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? Where am I? Where am I spiritually, emotionally, etc.? That's the first question. It's a great question, worthy of many, many classes. But really, it's a question that's a lifelong question. And it fits perfectly with the idea of the Seder and the wilderness and the searching for our own sense of fulfillment, authenticity, promised land. Second question, another great question. This comes from towards the end of Genesis 37:15, when Joseph is sent out by his father to look for his brothers, and he meets a man, an Ish. We don't know who this Ish is. But he asks a very interesting question to Joseph. Ma tevakesh, where are you? Ma tevakesh in the sense of, what are you seeking? Not who are you seeking, but ma, what? What are you seeking? So if we ask first ayeka, where are you? And then the second question of our four questions is, what are you seeking? What do you want now at this stage of our life? All kinds of circumstances combine to influence the answer to that question: physical, emotional, spiritual, philosophical, familial, lots of change. There's a tendency to some people to say, what do I want? I just want some peace. But part of that also is a charge, I think, of the Jewish message to us as we get older. And that is, never stop seeking. Never stop looking. This goes to the power and centrality of our own relationships. Heschel, throughout his works, always talked about the fact that we are creatures in search of meaning. Well, what is that meaning? What are you seeking? Motivation, what are you seeking in that sense of your own personal meaning? And it may very, very well be different now at this stage in our 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s than it was in our 20s and 30s and 40s. But we are creatures in search of meaning. And how we answer that question, I think, also implies this constant sense of growth that Judaism teaches us. Never stop seeking. Never stop being afraid to go forth into a land we may not know. Just like the Israelites, when they crossed the Sea of Reeds, they were propelled by a vision, a mission. And in that sense of looking forward, in that sense of motivakesh, of what are we seeking, we come, many of us, to that stage in our lives when we confront one of these tensions. We talk about this a lot in classes that we do in Jewish sacred aging. One of the major tensions that we face as we get older, of holding on and letting go. Because in order to grow, in order to perhaps live a more authentic self at this stage in our life, some people may find, I just have to let go of some of the stuff that I've held on to that's really dragging me down. At this stage of my life, I need just to let go of it. I just need to hold on to those things, those people that give me strength, that give me peace, that give me affirmation, that give me recognition, that affirm who I am. The other stuff, I need to let go of. Sometimes this can be very, very painful. But I think it goes to that, and how we answer that second question, ma tevakesh. What do we seek? Another great question, the third question. This comes from this wonderful sense of the reunion of Joseph and his brothers. In Genesis 45, the brothers come seeking food. Joseph recognizes them. The brothers don't recognize Joseph now, a power in the country of Egypt. And there's this great chapter where he sends the Egyptians out of the room. He confronts his brothers. He says, I'm your brother. I am Joseph. And his first question, magnificent question, you can almost see this dramatized. Od Avichai, is Dad still alive? How is my father? It's a great question. And I think it really does follow up on, Ayeka and Mativ Akesh, Od Avichai. What does that mean? What can that mean now as we get older? Do we ever escape really our family of origin? Joseph certainly did not, despite all the circumstances. We also, in trying to answer this question, we affirm the door of adoredness of our existence, the generation to generation, that we are part, as Ecclesiastes 1 says, part of something greater than ourselves. Go look at that chapter. It's a magnificent piece of literature because it really says as the waters flow from the creeks into the rivers, into the earth, we're part of something greater than ourselves. And it also speaks to this idea of holding on to family and holding on to that which is so important in our life. It also speaks, I'm going to suggest to you this concept of the choices that we make in life. Because this Od Avichai, generation to generation, the fact that at this stage in our life, and perhaps more at this season of our years, we may do some life review and perhaps look back and say, gosh, what are some of the choices that I made? How do they impact me? How do they influence my life at this stage of my life? What have I learned from these choices? Some people live, as we talked about in a lot of classes that we do, in the land of woulda, shoulda, and coulda, in the neighborhood of if only. Not a good place to be, because we can't go back. We can look forward. As the beginning of the Torah states with the letter Bet, it's open to the future. Od Avichai, is my father still alive? Am I still part of this family? My family of origin, I still am here. As I look back, what are the choices that I have made? And how can I continue to make choices that sanctify and dignify life? Because Joseph had choices in that reunion. He could have been vengeful, but he chose shalom. He chose mishpacha. He chose family. And you could tell by that question that he asked, given everything, I'm your brother. How's my father? Is Dad still alive? This last question, again, comes from this wonderful story in the beginning of Exodus 3, and Moses and the burning bush. And where Moses really asked, who am I? He asked God, who are you? Who am I? He wants to know who is going to send him to Pharaoh to plead for the Israelites. We'll read this into Seder. And this comes, I think, to a point in our lives when we search for a sense of what I will call spiritual maturity. Am I comfortable with who I am? Or am I still being defined by others? The uniqueness of who we are as Tselem Elohim, no matter where we are, this idea of being fashioned in the image of likeness of the sacred, each in our own way. And our lifelong dialogue with that definition in Exodus 3 of when Moses asked for God's name, and Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Think about that. In most of the modern translations, it's not translated. And I think the message is, as the Seder symbolizes, because we do the same thing every year, but we constantly amend the Seder experience. We constantly amend and change, hopefully, this concept of Ehyeh. Who is God? Who is God to us? And Judaism is this wonderful civilization that gives us the challenge and the freedom to constantly reevaluate what that definition, what those Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh means to us at various stages of my life. It may very well mean something different in my 70s than it did in my 30s or 40s or 50s. My relationship with that God, very different from when I walked off the beam at ordination in 1972 and now in 2024. Who am I spiritually? Who am I as a person? Am I comfortable with myself? Or do I still live a life defined by others? It takes courage to live your authentic self. So just 4 questions I'd like to ask you to think about as you ask those 4 questions at Seder and contemplate these questions throughout the Passover season. Ayeka, where are you? Ma tivakesh, what do I want? What do I seek? Od Avichai, or is my family, is my power, my friends, am I still alive? And Exodus 3, who am I? What is my relationship to the sacred? How do I incorporate and bring the sacred into my life at this stage of my life? 4 questions, and I wish you a very happy and most of all, healthy Passover. Thank you very much. Have a great holiday. And thank you to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. And until the next time we meet on Seekers of Meaning, take care, shalom, be kind.